take a deep dive into the book of 1 Kings.
You know, when you walk through the ruins of an ancient kingdom, there is this profound sense of silence that kind of settles over you.
Oh, absolutely. It's eerie.
Right. You look at these massive crumbling stone walls and the shattered columns just lying there in the dust, and you inevitably have to ask yourself, what happened?
Yeah.
How does an empire that was so incredibly powerful, so seemingly permanent, with its booming marketplaces and roaring chariots, how does it just collapse into absolute ruin?
It's the ultimate question of history, really.
It is. And today, we're doing an autopsy on an empire. We're jumping into a massive stack of historical records, architectural notes, and these ancient theological texts to find out exactly how that collapse happens. We're looking specifically at one of the most complex, staggering accounts from the ancient world, which is the book of 1 Kings. And we're going to treat this, you know, not as a collection of disjointed Sunday school fables, but as a gritty, integrated historical narrative.
Which is exactly how it was meant to be read.
Right. We are tracing the sheer brilliance of the United Kingdom under King Solomon, all the way to its violent, tragic fracturing into a divided and idolatrous nation. So, to give you a hook for today, think of it like this. 400 years of kings, and the only one who really mattered hadn't even been born yet.
I love that framing. It truly is the ultimate historical autopsy. Because, you know, we aren't just looking at the physical ruins here. We are reconstructing the psychological and really the spiritual disease that brought the whole structure down.
Okay, let's unpack this because we really need to set the stage for the listener.
Yeah, to understand that disease, we have to understand the staggering context in which this book was compiled. Imagine you are sitting in a besieged city.
Just a terrifying scenario.
Completely. According to ancient Jewish tradition and the textual evidence in our sources, the prophet Jeremiah likely compiled this history using ancient court annals right around 586 BC.
So literally right as everything is falling apart.
Exactly. The Babylonians are literally battering the gates of Jerusalem as he's doing this. The city is starving. It is about to burn to the ground, and the people are about to be deported. Jeremiah is putting these scrolls together as a survival manual for a people going into exile.
Wow.
He's answering the one burning question they all had, which is, you know, why is this happening to us?
So the author is essentially standing in the ashes of his own civilization, looking backward through 400 years of kings, trying to find the exact point of failure.
Precisely. And in doing so, he applies an evaluation metric that is entirely countercultural for the ancient Near East.
How so?
Well, if you read the royal annals of the Assyrians or the Babylonians or the Egyptians, a king is deemed successful if he expands the national borders, right? Or if he constructs massive monuments or creates a booming economy.
Right, the standard geopolitical scorecard.
Exactly. But the author of 1 Kings throws that metric completely out the window. A king in this book can have unparalleled military victories and a GDP that is just off the charts, but if he allows the worship of false gods, if he breaks the covenant with Yahweh, he is recorded as an absolute catastrophic failure.
I want to pause right there because covenant is a word we throw around a lot without really unpacking it. For the listener who might just picture like a standard legal contract, what exactly does covenant fidelity mean in this ancient context? And why is it the only standard that matters to this author?
That's a great question. So in the ancient world, particularly around the time of Moses, massive empires like the Hittites would make treaties with smaller, subjugated nations.
Okay.
These were called suzerain vassal treaties. The great king, the suzerain, would say to the vassal, I will protect you, I will provide for you, and I will give you this land. In return, you will give me absolute, undivided loyalty.
So it's an exclusive relationship.
Yes, very exclusive. If you do this, you will experience massive blessings. If you rebel and align with other kings, I will bring curses upon you, up to and including ripping you out of the land.
Oh, which is exactly what's happening in 586 BC.
Exactly. The biblical authors viewed Israel's relationship with God exactly through this lens. God was the great king. He gave them the land. Covenant fidelity simply meant giving God exclusive loyalty. So for the author of 1 Kings, political history is inseparable from spiritual history.
The nation's geopolitical security was directly tied to their spiritual faithfulness.
You nailed it.
It is a completely different scorecard for success, which honestly plunges us right into the intense political drama of the opening chapters.
Oh, the drama is incredible.
Right. We begin 1 Kings at the end of King David's life. Think about David's resume. He's the legendary warrior, the giant slayer, the poet who forged this incredibly powerful empire out of all these disparate tribes.
He's the ultimate hero of Israel.
He is. But now, he is roughly 70 years old. He's bedridden. The sources note that his circulatory system is failing so badly, he literally cannot even keep warm under piles of blankets.
It's a very frail picture of a once great warrior.
It really is. So his royal officials propose a medical solution that seems, well, utterly bizarre to a modern reader. They find a beautiful young woman, Abishag the Shunammite, to lie in bed with him just to share body heat.
Which, while recognized as a palliative medical practice in the ancient world, carried massive political implications.
I can imagine.
Yeah, in the ancient Near East, the king's vitality was symbolically linked to the vitality of the nation. If the king was perceived as weak or impotent, the vultures would immediately start circling.
Blood in the water.
Exactly. By bringing in Abishag, the court was attempting to restore the king's heat, yes, but they were also quietly testing his virility. The text explicitly notes that David, quote, knew her not, meaning he had no sexual relations with her.
And the political translation of that biological fact was dangerous, right?
Extremely dangerous. It meant the great King David is fading, he can no longer govern, and nature, especially in an ancient monarchy, absolutely abhors a power vacuum.
And that power vacuum triggers an immediate succession crisis.
Yeah.
Because David had previously promised Bathsheba that her son, Solomon, would be the next king. But Solomon isn't the oldest surviving son. That title belongs to Adonijah.
Right.
And Adonijah looks at his dying father, sees the weakness, and just decides he isn't going to wait for permission. He declares, I will be king.
He just goes for it.
He does. It's an incredibly aggressive, highly coordinated PR campaign. He procures chariots, horsemen, and 50 runners to precede him wherever he goes. And then he makes his decisive move. He throws a massive royal feast at a place called the Stone of Zoheleth near the En-Rogel spring, which is just south of the Jerusalem city walls.
The strategy here is brilliant and honestly terrifying. Adonijah isn't just having a barbecue, you know. He is orchestrating a coronation masquerading as a religious festival.
Yeah.
And look at who he invites. He gets all the king's sons, the men of Judah, and crucially, he secures the backing of the two main pillars of state power. He gets Joab, David's ruthless, brilliant commander-in-chief, securing the military, and he gets Abiathar, the high priest, securing the religious establishment.
That's a powerhouse coalition.
It is. With the army and the church behind him, Adonijah assumes the throne is a foregone conclusion.
But the tension in the text comes from who he does not invite. He explicitly leaves out Solomon, he leaves out Bathsheba, he leaves out Nathan the prophet, and he leaves out Benaiah, the commander of David's personal elite bodyguard.
By excluding them from the fellowship of this specific sacrificial feast, Adonijah is loudly signaling his intentions in the language of the ancient Near East.
What's he saying?
He's declaring that these individuals are outside of his protection. The moment the oil hits his head and he is officially king, Solomon and his supporters will be categorized as political rivals. And in that era, political rivals weren't just exiled, they were executed.
Wow. So Nathan the prophet realizes they are operating on a ticking clock. They have hours, maybe minutes, before the feast at En-Rogel concludes with Adonijah being crowned, which means the execution squads will be dispatched by nightfall.
Exactly. It's a race against time.
So Nathan rushes to Bathsheba, and they orchestrate this brilliant high-stakes intervention. Bathsheba goes into David's bedroom, reminds him of his sacred oath regarding Solomon, and drops the bombshell about Adonijah's rogue feast.
And the timing is key.
Right. Because as she is speaking, Nathan strategically enters the room to corroborate the intel. The shock of this treason shakes David completely out of his lethargy. He acts with the decisiveness of his youth.
He really does.
He orders Zadok the priest, Nathan the prophet, and Benaiah to take his own personal royal mule, which is the ancient equivalent of putting someone in the presidential motorcade, put Solomon on it, and ride down to the Gihon spring to anoint him king immediately.
The geography of this countermove is just incredible when you map it out.
Yeah, explain that.
You have two rival processions occurring simultaneously just outside the city walls. Down at En-Rogel, Adonijah is feasting with the military brass. But just half a mile north, at the Gihon spring, Solomon is being anointed with the sacred, specialized oil brought directly from the tabernacle tent.
Right, and Gihon was the main water source for Jerusalem, so it was highly public.
Highly public. Everyone would see it.
And the public reaction is deafening. The sources describe the people playing pipes and rejoicing with such massive enthusiasm that the earth literally split with the sound of them.
I love that detail.
It's so cinematic.
Hmm.
And that acoustic shockwave travels the half-mile down the valley to Adonijah's party. Joab, the old general, hears the trumpets and the roar, and his military instincts kick in. He asks, why is the city in an uproar?
He knows something is wrong.
Instantly. Suddenly, a messenger bursts into the feast and drops the absolute worst-case scenario on them. King David just formally installed Solomon on the throne.
The panic is instantaneous.
Oh, total chaos. Adonijah's guests realize they are now participating in an act of high treason against a sitting anointed monarch. They scatter in sheer terror. Adonijah himself is so gripped by fear that he runs straight to the tabernacle and physically clings to the horns of the bronze altar, begging for his life.
Those horns on the corners of the altar were symbolically the most sacred point of the sanctuary. That's where the blood of the sacrifice was applied. Clinging to them was a recognized legal plea for sanctuary.
It's like calling time out in the middle of a war.
Basically, it was a desperate appeal for the mercy of God to override the justice of the king. And remarkably, for a newly minted ancient monarch who just survived an attempted coup, Solomon actually grants it.
He does.
He tells Adonijah to go home in peace, placing him on probation. He's essentially saying, your life is spared conditionally as long as you prove yourself to be a loyal subject.
Now that sounds incredibly wise and merciful, but we really need to dig into what happens next because it challenges our modern sensibilities.
Oh, it definitely does.
Right after this display of mercy, David gives Solomon his final dying instructions. And honestly, it reads like a mafia don handing over a hit list.
It's brutal.
It is. David tells his son to execute Joab, the general, for his past murders. He tells him to deal with a man named Shimei, who had violently cursed David years prior. And then, shortly after David passes away, Adonijah approaches Bathsheba and asks to marry Abishag, the very same young woman who had nursed David.
Which is a huge mistake.
Massive. When Solomon hears this request, his probation is over. He treats it as high treason and immediately has Adonijah executed by Benaiah. He fires Abiathar the priest. He orders Joab dragged from the altar and killed. He eventually executes Shimei. I imagine a listener hearing this and wondering, how on earth is this a demonstration of wisdom and not just a brutal, paranoid purge of all his political rivals?
That is a crucial tension to resolve because on the surface, it looks terrible. We have to view this through the geopolitical and theological lens of the ancient Near East, rather than, 21st century democratic norms. Let's look at Adonijah's request for Abishag first.
Okay.
To us, she was just David's nurse. But to the public, she belonged to the royal harem. In ancient dynastic politics, claiming the deceased king's concubine was a universally recognized method of claiming the king's throne.
Really?
Yes, it was exactly what Absalom did years earlier when he rebelled against David. Adonijah wasn't romantically interested. He was making a highly calculated secondary grab for power. He was probing for weakness. Solomon's wisdom allowed him to see the treason wrapped in a seemingly innocent request.
So Adonijah was essentially testing the fences to see if they were electrified.
Exactly.
And they were. But what about Joab and Shimei? Because that was David's hit list.
Joab and Shimei represent a deeper theological issue, which is blood guilt. Joab was a brilliant general, but he had coldly assassinated two rival commanders, Abner and Amasa, during times of peace, purely to protect his own political position.
Right, he murdered them.
According to the Torah, innocent blood that is shed pollutes the land, and that pollution can only be cleansed by bringing the murderer to justice. David, for complex political reasons, had been too weak to bring Joab to justice during his reign. Shimei had committed high treason. So, from the perspective of the biblical author, Solomon is not acting out of vindictive paranoia here.
What is he doing then?
He is executing delayed justice. He is purging the institutional guilt from David's dynasty. True, lasting peace, what the Hebrews called shalom, cannot exist, where unpunished injustice corrupts the foundation of the state. Solomon is establishing a bedrock of justice so the kingdom can actually flourish.
Wow, okay, that framing completely changes how we read those executions. It is institutional housekeeping to secure a fragile nation.
Exactly.
And that foundation of security sets up what is arguably one of the most famous moments in ancient literature. Solomon travels to the high place at Gibeon to offer massive sacrifices. That night, God appears to him in a dream and hands him the ultimate blank check. Ask what I shall give you.
Talk about pressure.
Right. Think about the weight of that. Solomon is likely around 20 years old at this time. He is inheriting a massive, complex empire. He is surrounded by geopolitical threats. And he responds with incredible vulnerability. He admits he feels like a little child who doesn't know how to go out or come in.
It's a beautiful moment of humility.
It is. He doesn't know how to govern this massive population.
Yeah.
So he asks for one specific thing. An understanding mind, the literal Hebrew, is a hearing heart. To discern between good and evil, to judge the people fairly.
And the brilliance of Solomon's request is really illuminated by what he does not ask for. The default request for an ancient monarch would be, a long life, staggering wealth, or the utter annihilation of his military enemies.
Right, the usual dictator wish list.
Yes. Instead, Solomon asks for the precise tool he needs to function effectively as God's vice-regent over God's people. He asks for the capacity to administer divine justice on earth. Because his priorities perfectly align with God's priorities for the covenant nation, God is profoundly pleased.
And God gives him more than he asked for.
He does. The Lord grants him an unprecedented depth of wisdom, but then graciously adds the wealth, honor, and security that Solomon didn't even ask for.
And the narrative immediately provides a stress test for this new divine wisdom. It is the famous story of the two prostitutes.
Oh, this is classic.
Imagine the scenario. These two women live alone in the same house. Both give birth to infants within days of each other. Tragically, one mother accidentally smothers her baby in the night. In her grief and panic, she swaps the dead infant for the living one while the other mother sleeps.
Just an awful situation.
The next morning, they end up in the royal court, standing before the king, screaming over who the living child belongs to. It is the ultimate legal nightmare. It's a classic he said, she said, with absolutely zero witnesses and obviously no DNA testing back then.
Right.
Solomon's solution is so jarring that it must have horrified the court. He casually asks for a sword and orders his guards to cut the living baby in half and give each woman a piece.
On the surface, it sounds barbaric, almost deranged.
Completely deranged.
But Solomon isn't practicing law here. He is applying profound psychological insight. He understands that he cannot extract the truth from the evidence, so he has to extract it from human nature.
Oh, that's good.
He orchestrates a high-stakes psychological stress test. He knows that the true mother's compassion, her fierce, biological, sacrificial love for her child, will instantly override her desire to win the legal dispute.
And it works flawlessly. The real mother instantly throws herself forward and screams, "No, give her the living baby, just don't kill it." She would rather lose her child to a liar than see her child die.
Which is heart-wrenching.
It is. Meanwhile, the liar, driven by spite and a twisted sense of fairness, says, "Let it be neither mine nor yours. Divide it." Solomon doesn't need witnesses anymore.
Yeah.
Human nature has testified perfectly. He instantly identifies the true mother, hands her the baby, and his reputation absolutely explodes. The text notes that all of Israel stood in awe of the king, realizing that the wisdom of God was in him to administer justice.
And that divine discernment, coupled with the political security he achieved through his early purges, ushers in the golden age of the United Monarchy. Having secured his borders, Solomon now possesses the two things necessary for massive cultural advancement: unprecedented peace and unprecedented wealth. He directs these resources toward the fulfillment of his father David's ultimate unfulfilled dream, which is building a permanent house for the Lord.
This transitions us into the absolute peak of Israel's glory, detailed in chapters 5 through 10 of 1 Kings. The scale at which the kingdom under Solomon is functioning is almost hard to comprehend. To grasp the wealth, just look at the daily grocery list for his royal court.
It's staggering.
The sources detail that the daily provision was 185 bushels of fine flour, 375 bushels of meal, 30 head of cattle, 100 sheep, plus deer, gazelles, roebucks, and fattened fowl, every single day.
That volume of food suggests a royal administration feeding somewhere between 10,000 to 15,000 people daily. It requires a massive bureaucratic and agricultural infrastructure to sustain that level of consumption without collapsing the local economy.
Exactly. And he doesn't just tax his own people. He becomes the dominant economic broker of the entire region. He controls the major trade routes from the Euphrates River in the north all the way down to the border of Egypt.
He's an international powerhouse.
He essentially corners the arms market by importing horses from Cilicia and chariots from Egypt, acting as the incredibly wealthy middleman for the surrounding kings. He maintains a standing force of 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horsemen. He even builds a merchant marine fleet on the Red Sea that travels to over possibly modern-day India or the Horn of Africa, bringing back gold, silver, ivory, apes, and peacocks.
Apes and peacocks.
I know. The influx of wealth is so immense that the text famously states silver became as common as stones in Jerusalem.
And this kind of international dominance naturally attracts the attention of global leaders. The most famous example, of course, is the visit of the Queen of Sheba, originating from modern-day Yemen.
Right.
She isn't just dropping by for tea. This is a massive diplomatic and trade mission. She travels roughly 1,200 miles across brutal desert terrain with a massive caravan bearing spices, precious stones, and 4.5 tons of gold.
4.5 tons.
Yes. Her stated goal is to test Solomon with hard questions, likely complex riddles, diplomatic puzzles, and philosophical inquiries. But after she converses with him, and crucially, after she observes the staggering efficiency, justice, and sheer opulence of his administration, she is left breathless. Her famous conclusion is, "The half was not told me." The reality of Solomon's kingdom exceeded the wildest international rumors.
It is the absolute zenith. And the crown jewel of this golden age, the project that consumes Solomon's focus, is the temple. Construction begins in 966 BC, the 4th year of his reign. Because Israel lacks the specialized timber and architectural expertise for a project of this magnitude, Solomon forms a strategic partnership with Hiram, the king of Tyre.
Right, the Phoenicians.
Yeah, Hiram sends highly skilled Phoenician craftsmen and vast amounts of cedar and cypress wood from the forests of Lebanon. They literally cut these massive logs, bind them into huge rafts, and float them down the Mediterranean coast to Joppa, where they are hauled overland to Jerusalem.
The logistics are just staggering for the ancient world. The labor force drafted for this project numbers in the tens of thousands. Men are sent in shifts to Lebanon, while tens of thousands more are conscripted to quarry massive blocks of limestone and transport them to the Temple Mount.
It's an industrial machine.
But amid all this massive industrial effort, there is a detail in 1 Kings 6.7 that is profoundly beautiful. The text notes that the stones were fully prepared and finished at the quarry before they were brought to the site. So while the temple was being built, no hammer, no axe, nor any iron tool was heard.
Let's linger on that for a second. Think about the sensory experience of a massive ancient construction site. It would normally be deafening. The shouting, the cracking of stone, the ringing of iron. But Solomon orchestrates this massive logistical puzzle so that the actual building site in Jerusalem remains bathed in profound silence.
It was an act of deep theological reverence. The noise, the chaos, and the violence of human industry were intentionally kept away from the place where God's holy presence would reside. It was an architectural expression of peace.
The architecture itself is breathtaking. The structure is built of massive white limestone blocks, but you wouldn't see them from the inside. The interior is completely paneled with Lebanese cedar, intricately carved with gourds and open flowers. And then the entire interior, the floors, the walls, the ceiling, is overlaid with pure gold.
It must have glowed.
The building itself is relatively small by modern cathedral standards, about 90 feet long, 30 feet wide, and 45 feet high. But the value of the materials is astronomical. The sources estimate the gold alone, adjusting for historic prices, was worth well over 2.5 billion modern dollars. Outside the temple portico, they cast two massive, freestanding bronze pillars. They named the south pillar Jachin, which means he shall establish, and the north pillar Boaz, which means in it is strength.
Those pillars functioned as a permanent visual sermon to anyone approaching the sanctuary. They declared that the security and strength of the nation did not lie in Solomon's wealth, his 1,400 chariots, or his brilliant diplomacy, but solely in Yahweh. God alone establishes, and in God alone is their strength.
It takes 7 years to finish the construction, and then we reach what feels like the absolute climax of the entire book of 1 Kings chapter 8, the dedication of the temple.
The peak of the book.
It takes place during the Feast of Tabernacles, a time when all of Israel is gathered. The priests bring the ancient Ark of the Covenant, the sacred gold-covered chest containing the original stone tablets of the law given to Moses, and they carry it into the inner sanctuary, the Holy of Holies, placing it beneath the outstretched wings of massive gold-overlaid cherubim. And the moment the priests step out of the holy place, a thick, dark cloud fills the entire temple. It is the Shekinah glory of the Lord.
Let's define that term for our listeners because it is vital. Shekinah comes from the Hebrew root word shekan, which means to dwell or to settle. This thick, luminous cloud was the visible manifestation of God's holy presence.
Like what they saw in the wilderness.
Exactly. The visual parallel to the book of Exodus is undeniable here. Just as God's glory cloud descended and filled the portable tabernacle in the wilderness, signaling his presence among a wandering nomadic people, it now violently fills this permanent stone and gold temple, signaling his resting place among a settled, established nation. The presence is so dense, so overwhelmingly holy, that the text says the priests literally cannot stand up to continue their ministering.
Standing before this awe-inspiring sight, Solomon gets up on a bronze platform and offers this massive, sweeping prayer of dedication. And amidst all the grandeur, he says something incredibly grounded. He looks at this multi-billion-dollar architectural marvel and prays, "But will God indeed dwell on the earth? Behold, heaven and the highest heaven cannot continue, how much less this house that I have built."
He recognizes the limitation.
He openly acknowledges the paradox, which makes me want to ask you, if God is omnipresent, as Solomon clearly understands, why does this specific hyper-expensive box of cedar and gold matter so much? Why is it the focal point of their entire civilization?
Because the temple is fundamentally about access. While God cannot be contained by the universe, let alone a building, he graciously chooses to place his name, his localized accessible presence, in this specific spot. Think of it like a localized embassy of heaven on earth.
An embassy, right?
But more importantly, we have to look at the temple through the lens of biblical typology.
Wait, for the listener who isn't familiar with that term, what exactly is typology? Is it like a historical rhyme?
That's a great way to put it. Typology is when real historical people, events, or institutions in the Old Testament serve as a type or a foreshadowing pattern that points forward to an ultimate, greater fulfillment in the New Testament.
Okay, so how does that apply here?
The author of Kings is presenting Solomon and his temple as a profound yet partial picture pointing forward to an ultimate reality. Solomon is the son of David, he is the Prince of Peace, and he is the wise king who builds the house where God dwells with humanity. But centuries later, Jesus Christ, the ultimate greater son of David, arrives on the scene. And in John chapter 2, Jesus explicitly refers to his own physical body as the true temple.
Oh.
Christ is the ultimate meeting place of God and man. He is the Word made flesh, dwelling, literally tabernacling among us. Solomon's temple, as glorious and wealthy as it was only a temporary architectural shadow pointing forward to the permanent reality of the incarnation.
Something greater than Solomon is here. That connects the ancient history to the ultimate narrative so beautifully. But this brings us to the tragic pivot of the book.
There we go.
Because the question hanging over the text is, how does the wisest man in the history of the world make the most incredibly foolish, destructive choices? Chapter 11 of 1 Kings is devastating. The external peace and the staggering wealth we just explored actually masked a slow, silent, devastating internal compromise.
It is the tragedy of institutional wisdom versus personal wisdom. Solomon could brilliantly organize a nation, but he failed to govern his own heart. His strategy for maintaining that unprecedented international peace relied heavily on diplomacy. And in the ancient Near East, diplomatic treaties were sealed with political marriages.
And Solomon took that standard practice to a grotesque extreme. The text says he loved many foreign women, 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines.
1,000 women.
He marries the daughter of Pharaoh. He marries women from the Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites. These are the very nations God had explicitly warned the Israelites not to intermarry with, precisely because their foreign spouses would turn their hearts toward other gods.
Which is exactly what happens.
It is exactly the slow fade that happens. The wisest man in the world gets old, and his wives turn his heart away. He wants to keep them happy, to honor the diplomatic alliances, so he starts building high places, pagan shrines, on the hills directly facing Jerusalem. He builds altars for Chemosh, the god of Moab, and Molech, the god of Amorrah.
We really cannot gloss over what the worship of these specific deities entailed. Moloch worship famously involved child sacrifice, passing infants through the fire to secure agricultural or financial blessings.
It's horrific.
Think about the horrifying irony of this. The man who dedicated his wealth and wisdom to building the glorious temple to Yahweh, the God of life and justice, is now using royal funds to build infrastructure for the most horrific, demonic, abusive practices of the ancient Near East, right in the suburbs of the Holy City.
Just staring right at the temple.
Exactly.
Yeah.
His heart was no longer fully devoted to the Lord, and because covenant fidelity is the only metric that matters, the Lord announces a devastating judgment. Because Solomon has broken the covenant, the kingdom will be violently torn away from his royal line.
But there's a delay, right?
Yes. Out of grace and for the sake of the promise made to David, God promises to delay the division until after Solomon dies and to leave one tribe, Judah, for Solomon's descendants to rule.
Here's where it gets really interesting. That sets up the absolute fracturing of the nation. Solomon eventually dies after a 40-year reign. His son, Rehoboam, travels north to the city of Shechem to be officially confirmed as king. But the 10 northern tribes are restless.
Very restless.
They're led by a highly capable, charismatic administrator named Jeroboam, who had previously fled to Egypt after Solomon identified him as a political threat. The northern tribes present Rehoboam with a very reasonable demand. They essentially say, "Your father Solomon put a heavy, crushing yoke on us. Lighten the harsh labor and the heavy taxes, and we will serve you with absolute loyalty." Rehoboam tells them to give him 3 days to think about it.
And here we witness one of the most fatal failures of leadership in recorded history. Rehoboam first consults the older men, the seasoned elders who had advised his father Solomon. Their advice is profoundly wise and counterintuitive to ancient despots. They tell him, if you will be a servant to this people today and serve them and speak good words to them when you answer them, then they will be your servants forever. It is the very essence of servant leadership.
But Rehoboam rejects it. He feels it makes him look weak. So he turns to the young men he grew up with, basically the privileged, sheltered frat boys of the royal court, and asks for their take.
And their advice is terrible.
It is the ultimate display of arrogant machismo. They tell him to go back to the people and say, "My little finger is thicker than my father's waist. And whereas my father laid on you a heavy yoke, I will add to your yoke. My father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions."
Whips embedded with sharp metal or glass, most likely.
Right. And Rehoboam actually stands in front of the nation and delivers this horrific threat. The reaction is immediate. The 10 northern tribes instantly secede. They shout the ancient rebel yell, "What portion do we have in David? To your tents, O Israel."
The kingdom fractures.
The United Kingdom violently splits right down the middle. You now have Judah and Benjamin in the south under Rehoboam, and the 10 tribes in the north under Jeroboam.
It is a masterclass in how to destroy an empire in 3 days. But notice the theological commentary embedded by the author of Kings. The text explicitly states that this turn of events was brought about by the Lord to fulfill the prophecy of judgment spoken against Solomon.
Okay, I really want to dig into the mechanics of that, because looking closely at the text, this looks like a purely economic and political revolt. The people are explicitly crying out about forced labor, conscription, and heavy taxes.
That's what they say, yes.
So a skeptical listener might ask, was it really Solomon's foreign wives and his spiritual idolatry that ruined everything? Or was it simply his crushing economic policies and his son's blistering arrogance that caused the rebellion?
That is a brilliant question. And to answer it, we have to look at what I call the economics of idolatry. From the perspective of the biblical author, you cannot separate the spiritual from the economic. They are the exact same disease presenting different symptoms.
How so?
Let's trace the cause and effect. The gods of the surrounding nations, Molech, Chemosh, Baal, were despotic, demanding gods who consumed their worshippers and demanded exploitation for blessing. Yahweh, in contrast, is a God of justice who specifically delivered his people from Egyptian slavery.
He freed the slaves.
Exactly. When Solomon abandoned covenant fidelity to Yahweh, he inevitably abandoned the ethical protections that covenant provided for the average citizen. To fund his massive building projects, his 700 wives, and his international trade dominance, Solomon essentially turned Israel back into an Egypt. He used his own citizens as forced slave labor to build his empire.
Wow.
So the crushing economic oppression that the people rebelled against was the direct, inevitable fruit of Solomon's spiritual idolatry. The divided heart of the king directly resulted in the oppressive policies that created a literally divided kingdom.
So the spiritual decay fundamentally guarantees the political rock. And that takes us straight into the newly formed northern kingdom under Jeroboam. Jeroboam has his 10 tribes, he's got a massive population, and he establishes his new nation called Israel. But he immediately faces a massive existential political crisis.
The geography problem.
Right. The temple, the Ark of the Covenant, and the priesthood, the absolute center of the Israelites' cultural and religious identity, are sitting in Jerusalem, which is the capital city of his rival Rehoboam.
Jeroboam is a pragmatist. He runs the political calculus and realizes he has a major vulnerability. He thinks, if these people keep traveling south to Jerusalem 3 times a year to offer sacrifices at the temple, their hearts will eventually return to the house of David. They will nostalgically remember the United Kingdom, realize I am in the way, assassinate me, and return to Rehoboam.
It's a valid political fear.
It is. He understands a fundamental truth of statecraft. To maintain political separation, you must enforce religious separation.
So he pulls off what has to be one of the most disastrous, cynical reforms in history. He crafts 2 massive golden calves. He strategically places one in the far north at the city of Dan, and he puts the other in the south at Bethel, right on the main road leading down to Jerusalem. He essentially creates a geographic trap for pilgrims,
It blocks the road.
and he tells the people, "You have gone up to Jerusalem long enough. Behold your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." Think about the psychology here. It's like a corporation realizing they're losing market share, so they create a cheap, knockoff convenience brand.
Yes, a convenience religion.
He sets up his own counterfeit priesthood, allowing anyone who wants the job to serve, completely bypassing the Levites. He unilaterally changes the dates of the sacred festivals. He makes religion local, easy, undemanding, and utterly hollow.
It is breathtakingly cynical. And notice the specific, calculated phrase he uses, "Behold your gods, who brought you up out of Egypt." He is intentionally quoting the exact words Aaron used at Mount Sinai centuries earlier when Aaron fashioned the first golden calf while Moses was receiving the law.
Which raises an obvious question: why cows again? Of all the majestic animals or symbols in the world, why do they keep defaulting back to golden calves?
To us, a cow seems, mundane. But in the ancient Near Eastern context, the bull was the ultimate symbol of agricultural fertility, raw strength, and sexual power. It was intimately associated with the Canaanite storm god, Baal, who supposedly rode on a bull.
So he's mixing Yahweh worship with Baal worship.
Exactly. By using this specific imagery, Jeroboam was cynically tapping into a potent, familiar cultural symbol and merging it with Israel's historical memory of the Exodus. He was offering a terrifying compromise. He was essentially telling the people, we aren't abandoning Yahweh, we are just worshiping him in a more accessible, culturally relevant, modern way.
But the reality is much darker.
Much darker. Because in doing so, he fundamentally corrupted the nature of God. He reduced the invisible, transcendent creator of the universe to a manageable, predictable, agricultural idol that existed to serve the state.
And this singular act of political pragmatism sets the spiritual DNA for the entire 200-year history of the Northern Kingdom. From this point forward, every single Northern king is evaluated and condemned by one recurring tragic phrase: "He walked in the sins of Jeroboam, which he made Israel to sin."
It's the original sin of the North.
It kicks off a relentless downward spiral of assassinations, military coups, and escalating wickedness. The throne changes hands through blood and violence continually, which eventually lands us at the absolute bottom of the barrel king Ahab.
The worst of the worst. The author of 1 Kings summarizes Ahab's reign with chilling clarity. Ahab did more to provoke the Lord to anger than all the kings of Israel who were before him, and the primary catalyst for this unprecedented wickedness was his marriage to Jezebel.
Jezebel. Just the name itself still carries an immense cultural weight of villainy today.
Oh, definitely.
She is a Phoenician princess, the daughter of Ethbal, the king of Sidon. And it's vital to note that Ethbal was a former priest of the goddess Astarte, who had assassinated his way to the throne.
Which tells you exactly what kind of environment she was raised in.
Exactly. Jezebel grew up in a household defined by religious fanaticism and political murder. When she marries Ahab, she doesn't just want her religion tolerated alongside Yahweh worship. She aggressively, violently imports hundreds of prophets of Baal and Asherah, and she systematically begins a campaign of slaughtering the prophets of Yahweh.
It is state-sponsored terrorism against the covenant.
The true faith of Israel is effectively on life support, literally hiding in caves.
And this extreme darkness brings about a crucial shift in how God interacts with the nation. During the era of the kings, when the monarchy comprehensively fails to uphold the covenant, God activates the prophetic office in a new way.
How so?
Well, the prophets are raised up to serve as God's prosecuting attorneys. We often think of prophets as mere fortune tellers predicting the future, but primarily they were covenant enforcers. They arrived to point out the broken terms of the treaty and announce the impending consequences. And in this darkest hour, against a state apparatus dedicated to Baal, God sends his most rugged, uncompromising enforcer.
Enter Elijah the Tishbite.
The legend.
He bursts onto the scene in 1 Kings 17 with absolutely no backstory, no pedigree, no genealogy. He simply walks right into King Ahab's court, stares down the most wicked king in history, and declares, "As the Lord, the God of Israel lives, before whom I stand, there shall be neither dew nor rain these years except by my word."
Boom.
To declare a drought like that, it's wild.
To understand the sheer audacity of this statement, we have to understand the theology of Baal. Baal was worshipped throughout Canaan as the rider of the clouds, the god of storms, lightning, rain, and agricultural fertility.
The guy who brings the water.
Right. And in an agrarian society, if it doesn't rain, your children starve to death. So worshiping Baal was viewed as pragmatic insurance. By declaring a total drought, Elijah is executing a direct, targeted theological strike. He is walking into Baal's supposed domain, flipping the switch off, and declaring that Yahweh, not Baal, controls the skies.
Wow.
He is attacking the core premise of their entire idolatrous economy.
It's an epic declaration of war. And immediately after dropping this bomb, God tells Elijah to run and hide. First, he hides by the brook Cherith, where he drinks from the stream, and God miraculously sends ravens to bring him bread and meat every morning and evening.
A miracle in the wilderness.
But eventually, because of the drought he prophesied, the brook dries up. And then, in a move of profound irony and geographic danger, God sends Elijah to a place called Zarephath.
The geography here is loaded with meaning. Zarephath is located in Sidon. That is the very heartland of Jezebel's home territory.
Right in the lion's den.
Exactly. God sends his most wanted prophet to hide right in the backyard of the Baal-worshipping queen who is trying to kill him.
And God doesn't send him to a wealthy sympathizer. He sends him to a desperately poor, starving Gentile widow who's gathering sticks to cook one final meal for her and her son before they die of starvation. Elijah asks her for water and a morsel of bread. When she explains she only has a handful of flour and a little oil left, Elijah tells her to make him a small cake first, promising that the God of Israel will not let her flour or oil run out until the rain returns.
And she actually does it.
She obeys, acting in tremendous faith, and the miracle happens. The jar is never empty for the duration of the multi-year drought. Later, when her son tragically dies of a sudden illness, Elijah takes the boy to his upper room, cries out to God, stretches himself over the child 3 times, and God resurrects the boy from the dead.
We really cannot overstate the theological humiliation this presents to the northern kingdom. These incredible miracles sustain food during a famine, and power over death itself are occurring in Gentile territory, right under the nose of Baal's high priesthood. They serve as a massive rebuke to Israel's unbelief.
Because Israel should have been the ones experiencing this.
Exactly. Centuries later, Jesus himself preaches a sermon in Luke chapter 4 referencing this exact story. He enrages his hometown crowd by pointing out that while there were men starving widows in Israel during Elijah's day, God bypassed every single one of them and sent his prophet to a pagan widow in Sidon simply because she exhibited the faith that Israel lacked.
That is fascinating. The drought grinds on for 3.5 grueling years. The land is decimated. Finally, God tells Elijah the time for hiding is over. It's time to show himself to Ahab. This sets up arguably the most cinematic, intense showdown in the entire Old Testament Mount Carmel.
The ultimate showdown.
Elijah demands that Ahab gather all Israel, along with the 450 prophets of Baal, to the top of the mountain. The whole nation gathers, desperate and starving. Elijah steps forward, alone against the state religion, and delivers this incredible ultimatum to the crowd. How long will you go limping between 2 different opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal, then follow him. And the text delivers this haunting detail. The people answered him not a word. They were completely paralyzed by their own compromise.
The Hebrew phrase translated as limping between 2 opinions is highly descriptive. It literally suggests hobbling back and forth on 2 unequal legs. It's the physical manifestation of indecision.
They couldn't pick a side.
The Israelites were trying to hedge their bets. They wanted to worship Yahweh because he was tied to their historical national identity, the God of the Exodus. But they desperately wanted to worship Baal to ensure their agricultural prosperity and survival. Elijah forces the crisis. He declares that the universe is not big enough for both. Syncretism is a lie. They must choose.
To force the choice, he proposes a contest. 2 bulls, 2 stone altars, wood, but absolutely no fire. The God who answers by fire to consume the sacrifice is the true God. He graciously lets the 450 prophets of Baal go first. They prepare their bowl. They pray from morning until noon, crying out, "O Baal, answer us." But there is no voice, and no one answers.
Nothing happens.
And this is where Elijah engages in what can only be described as epic historical trash talk. He starts mocking them mercilessly in front of the whole nation. He shouts, "Cry aloud, for he is a god. Either he is musing, or he is relieving himself, or he is on a journey, or perhaps he's asleep and must be awakened."
It is incredibly biting satire. Elijah is weaponizing humor to expose the absolute absurdity of idolatry. He is pointing out the ridiculousness of believing that a deity could be too busy, taking a nap, or, as the euphemism suggests, using the restroom. He is deconstructing their worldview in real time.
The bull prophets become utterly frantic. They start dancing erratically around the altar, and then they resort to their most extreme rituals, slashing themselves with swords and lances until they are covered in blood, trying to manipulate their god through self-harm. They rave on until the time of the evening sacrifice. Still nothing. Total silence.
The complete failure of their god.
Then Elijah steps up. He repairs the ruined altar of the Lord using 12 stones representing the unified tribes of Israel, a profound statement of identity. He arranges the wood, cuts the bowl, and then, to completely eliminate any skeptical claims of a hidden spark or trick, he orders them to fill 4 massive jars with precious, scarce water and drench the entire altar. He has them do it 3 times until the wood is soaked and the trench surrounding the altar is overflowing with water.
He's making it impossible.
Yes. And then, in stark contrast to the frantic raving of the false prophets, Elijah prays a remarkably simple, quiet prayer. He just asks God to prove that he is God and to turn the hearts of the people back to him.
And the response is instantaneous and devastating.
Fire falls from heaven. It doesn't just burn the meat. It consumes the sacrifice, the wet wood, the solid limestone rocks of the altar, the surrounding dust, and violently licks up all the water in the trench. The shockwave of this reality hits the crowd. The people immediately throw themselves face first on the ground and scream, "The Lord, he is God! The Lord, he is God!"
The spell is broken.
And following the strict laws of the covenant regarding false prophets who lead the nation into idolatry, Elijah orders the immediate execution of the 450 prophets of Baal. The drought breaks, the rain falls, and Elijah runs ahead of Ahab's chariot all the way back to Jezreel. But I have to pause and ask you about the methodology here. Usually throughout these historical books, God works quietly. He works through the providence of a king's administrative decision or the quiet courage of a woman like Bathsheba. Why does God suddenly utilize such massive theatrical pyrotechnics here on Mount Carmel?
Because the spiritual darkness in Israel was so profound that a subtle providence simply wouldn't cut through it. The covenant was suffocating under state-sponsored terrorism against the true faith. Jezebel had utilized the power of the throne to cast a spell over the nation, creating a powerful, intimidating illusion that Baal was supreme and untouchable.
It needed a sledgehammer, not a scalpel.
Exactly. It required a national, undeniable, scientifically impossible demonstration of Yahweh's absolute supremacy to break that spell and force the nation to a decision point. Furthermore, Elijah stands here as the ultimate forerunner figure in the prophetic line.
Like John the Baptist.
Yes, his ministry is defined by bold confrontation, miraculous power, and calling for radical repentance. He perfectly prefigures John the Baptist, who centuries later would arrive in the spirit and power of Elijah to call the nation to repentance in the wilderness before the arrival of Christ.
That context makes perfect sense. The pyrotechnics were the only tool loud enough for the moment. But this brings us to a fascinating psychological pivot in the narrative. Because if you are reading this, you would logically think that calling down fire from heaven, ending a 3-year drought, seeing the entire nation repent, and executing the false priesthood would fix the kingdom.
You'd think the story ends there.
You'd think Elijah would be riding high, ready to take over. But as anyone who has poured their heart and soul into a massive high-stakes project knows, the highest spiritual highs are almost always followed by crushing emotional crashes.
1 Kings 19 provides one of the most profound, realistic studies of human frailty and clinical burnout in all of ancient literature. Ahab goes home to the palace and reports everything that happened on Carmel to his wife, Jezebel. And Jezebel, demonstrating a terrifying level of hardened resolve, does not repent. Instead, she doubles down.
She threatens him.
She sends a messenger to Elijah with a chilling oath, essentially saying, "May the gods kill me if I don't make your life exactly like the lives of my dead prophets by this time tomorrow."
And the incredible irony is that Elijah, the man who just stared down an entire nation, the man who mocked 450 prophets and called down fire from the sky, snaps. He panics and runs for his life. He flees out of the northern kingdom, all the way south through Judah to Beersheba. He leaves his servant behind and walks a full day's journey deep into the barren wilderness.
He's completely isolating himself.
He finally collapses under a solitary broom tree, totally exhausted, and begs God to take his life. He says, "It's enough now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am no better than my fathers." It is post-Project Depression on a biblical prophetic scale. He is utterly depleted.
He is experiencing a complete physiological and psychological collapse. He is dealing with deep despair, adrenaline withdrawal, physical exhaustion, and a profound, paralyzing sense of isolation. He genuinely believes he is the absolute last faithful person left on earth, and that his life's work has been a complete failure because Jezebel is still in power.
But God's response is so surprising.
I want you to notice how beautifully and gently God responds to this broken prophet. God does not appear and rebuke him for his son-like of faith. God doesn't give him a theological lecture. Instead, God sends an angel to gently wake him up, providing freshly baked bread and a jar of water.
Breakfast in bed.
Pretty much. The angel tells him to eat and then lets him go back to sleep. God tends to his physical, bodily needs first. Then, strengthened by that supernatural food, Elijah travels for 40 days and 40 nights to Mount Horeb. Now, Mount Horeb is another name for Mount Sinai, the very mountain where Moses received the Ten Commandments centuries earlier. Elijah is retreating to the foundational bedrock of the covenant.
And it's at Horeb where God gives Elijah a radically different kind of revelation, fundamentally shifting his understanding of how God works. God tells Elijah to go stand on the mountain before the Lord. First, a great and incredibly strong wind tears through the mountains, literally breaking rocks in pieces. But the text says the Lord was not in the wind. Then a massive earthquake shakes the mountain, but the Lord is not in the earthquake.
Then the fire.
Then a raging fire sweeps through, but the Lord is not in the fire. God is withholding himself from the spectacular. And after the fire, there is a low whisper, a still small voice. And when Elijah hears that quiet sound, he wraps his face in his cloak in reverence and steps out at the entrance of the cave.
It is a brilliant, tender corrective to Elijah's entire theology of ministry. Elijah had just experienced the fire, the drama, and the earthquake of Mount Carmel. And when that spectacular display didn't immediately change Jezebel's heart or permanently face the nation, he fell into despair. He thought the fire had failed.
So what is God saying with the whisper?
God is showing him, through this sensory experience, that while he can use the spectacular, the destructive, and the dramatic to get people's attention, his primary, enduring, transformative work is often done through the quiet, persistent whisper of his word. The spectacular event shatters the rock, but it is the quiet voice that actually changes the human heart.
And the intimacy of that quiet voice, God gently restores him. He gives him a new, multi-generational mission. He tells him to go back and anoint Hazael as king over Syria, Jehu as king over Israel, and crucially, to anoint Elisha as his own prophetic successor. God is showing him, your ministry isn't over, it's just transitioning. I'm putting a succession plan in place.
And he also fixes Elijah's perspective.
Right, God corrects Elijah's depressed mathematics. He says, I have kept for myself 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not bowed to Baal. You are not alone, Elijah. There is a hidden remnant. Now get back to work.
Which perfectly sets up one of Elijah's final major confrontations with Ahab. The narrative moves to the story of Naboth's vineyard in 1 Kings 21, which serves as a micro-case study of everything that is wrong with Ahab's reign.
Right. We shift back from the wilderness to the royal palace in Jezreel. Ahab has his winter palace there, and right next to the palace grounds is a beautiful, flourishing vineyard owned by a local citizen named Naboth. Ahab looks out his window, decides he wants that specific plot of land to turn into a royal vegetable garden, and offers to buy it or trade for a better vineyard.
Which sounds fine today.
To a modern ear, this sounds like a totally reasonable real estate transaction. But Naboth flatly refuses, saying, the Lord forbid that I should give you the inheritance of my fathers. And we need to understand why he says that, because in ancient Israelite law, land wasn't just commercial real estate that you could liquidate for a profit. Land was a sacred trust, given by God to specific tribes and families to hold in perpetuity. Selling your ancestral inheritance to the crown was a violation of the Torah.
Exactly. Naboth isn't being stubborn or holding out for a better price. He is acting out of deep covenant fidelity. He is standing on the law of Moses, placing his obedience to God above the desires of the king.
And King Ahab's reaction is pathetic. He acts like a petulant toddler who is told he can't have a toy. He goes home, lies down on his bed, turns his face to the wall, and refuses to eat. Enter Queen Jezebel. She finds her husband sulking, asks what's wrong, and when she hears about Naboth's refusal, her response is chilling. She essentially says, are you the king of Israel or not? Get up and eat. I'll get you the vineyard.
She despises the covenant.
She doesn't understand covenant law at all. She only understands raw, despotic power. So she orchestrates this horrific Mafia-Style hit using the very legal system she despises. She writes letters in Ahab's name, seals them with his royal signet ring, and orders the elders of Naboth's city to proclaim a religious fast. They seat Naboth prominently at the head of the assembly, and then they bring in two scoundrels, worthless men, to publicly, falsely accuse him of cursing God and the king.
Perjury.
Based on this perjured testimony, they drag an innocent man outside the city walls and stone him to death. Jezebel gets the message that the deed is done. She tells Ahab the coast is clear, and Ahab cheerfully goes down to take possession of the blood-soaked vineyard.
It is the ultimate perversion of justice. The king, who is mandated by God to be the protector of the law and the defender of the weak, completely abdicates his responsibility. He allows the mechanisms of justice to be weaponized to murder an innocent citizen just so he can have a vegetable patch. It represents the absolute moral bankruptcy of the northern kingdom.
But God sees the blood in the vineyard, and he sends Elijah to intercept Ahab exactly at the moment he goes down to claim the property. Imagine the scene. Ahab is admiring his stolen land, and suddenly his worst nightmare, the rugged prophet in the hair cloak, is standing in the vines. Ahab gasps, "Have you found me, O my enemy?"
And Elijah delivers the sentence.
He delivers a crushing, terrifying sentence. "Have you killed and also taken possession? In the place where dogs licked up the blood of Naboth, shall dogs lick your own blood." He prophesies the utter violent destruction of Ahab's entire dynasty and a particularly gruesome, unburied end for Jezebel.
It's a complete doom oracle.
But then something happens in the text that is deeply unsettling. Ahab, this objectively terrible king who has championed Baal, slaughtered prophets, and allowed the murder of an innocent man, actually cracks. He tears his royal clothes, puts on rough sackcloth, fasts, and walks around dejectedly. He actually humbles himself. And God sees this. God says to Elijah, "Have you seen how Ahab has humbled himself before me? Because he has humbled himself before me, I will not bring the disaster in his days."
It's shocking.
I really have to push back here, because this offends our sense of justice. Ahab is a monster. He let his wife execute an innocent man over a garden. Why does God spare him the immediate disaster just because he puts on sackcloth and sulks for a few days?
It absolutely offends our sense of retributive justice, but it forces us to confront the scandalous, almost reckless nature of God's grace. The text is making a profound theological point that the original readers, the exiles in Babylon, desperately needed to hear.
Right, because of what they're going through.
Yes, God's mercy is so incredibly vast, so eager to forgive, that even the worst, most wicked king in Israel's history receives a stay of execution when he displays even a microscopic shred of genuine humility. It reinforces a major underlying theme of the entire Book of Kings. God's judgments, even the horrific reality of the Babylonian exile, are disciplinary, not vindictive. Think about how the exiled readers would internalize this. If God is willing to show mercy and delay judgment for a monster like Ahab the moment he humbles himself, how much more will God show mercy to the broken exiles in Babylon if they will just humble themselves and turn their hearts back to him? It transforms a terrifying story of judgment into a profound beacon of hope.
That is an incredible reframing of the story. So as we pull back and look at the massive scope of what we've covered today, what does this all mean for us? We've traced 4 centuries of history. We've watched Israel reach the absolute zenith of global wealth, peace, and glory under Solomon. We saw them build a breathtaking temple of cedar and gold where God's presence literally descended in a cloud.
The highest of highs.
But we've also seen how a divided heart and that very same brilliant king fractured the nation in two. We watched Jeroboam forge a counterfeit religion of convenience with golden calves, trapping his people in idolatry. We saw the terrifying descent into the darkness of Ahab and Jezebel, and the fiery, lonely courage of Elijah standing against the tide, learning to hear God in the quiet whisper. Israel had absolutely everything. The law, the prophets, the staggering wealth, the divine covenant, and they squandered it all because they couldn't keep their hearts loyal to the God who gave it to them.
And that concludes the autopsy. The United Kingdom didn't fall because their armies were weak, or because they lacked resources, or because their economy collapsed. They fell because they abandoned their covenant with Yahweh. 1 Kings presents us with a stark, brutal contrast. On one hand, we see the flourishing that comes from the wisdom God offers to a hearing heart. On the other hand, we see the absolute ruin, the economic oppression, and the violence of chasing other gods.
It's a tragic picture.
Yet even in the smoking ruins of Jerusalem, the promise God made to David remains alive. Solomon was a glorious temple builder, but his heart turned. The entire book points forward, aching for the true Son of David, the Christ. Jesus is the true temple builder, the true Prince of Peace, whose heart is never divided, who establishes perfect justice, and whose kingdom will never, ever end.
It is a powerful reminder that institutional brilliance and intellectual knowledge are completely useless unless they're applied with an undivided heart. Which leaves us with a final thought to mull over today. Think about your own life, your own career, your own decisions. If Solomon, who was undeniably the wisest human being to ever live, a man who literally heard the voice of God in a dream, who built the temple, who administered unparalleled justice, if a man with that much advantage could be completely undone by small, incremental, pragmatic compromises in his personal life, how secure are we in our own wisdom without constant daily course correction? How often do we build our own golden calves of convenience when faithfulness gets too difficult?
It is a deeply uncomfortable question, but it is one that demands our attention, even thousands of years later.
It really is. Thank you for joining us on this custom-tailored deep dive into the source material. We hope this exploration of 1 Kings has given you some surprising insights into the mechanics of history and challenged the way you view this epic narrative. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and we'll see you next time.
Join us every week for a deep dive into a book of the Bible from the story behind Scripture.
If you'd like to read more about the stories behind Scripture, try Written in Fire, available on Amazon.com. It's the story of the destruction of Solomon's temple, told through the pages of the Bible and the voices of the prophets. The fire that destroyed the city and the temple did not end in ashes, but in a Messiah. Pick up Written in Fire on Amazon today.